Hello and welcome to 11FS FinTech Insider Spotlight, this week in partnership with 10x Banking. I'm Benjamin Ensor, Director of Research and Strategy at 11FS. In this show, we shine a spotlight on the best and brightest in the tech and financial services industries to get to know them, their businesses, and what they think the future of financial services and fintech will look like. On today's Spotlight, I'm delighted to be joined by Lewis Ide, Regional Vice President EMEA at 10x Banking, to dive into what 10x Banking does and its recently announced Metacore product, a new type of core banking technology that it promises will accelerate digital transformation. How are you doing today, Lewis?
I'm very good, thank you, Benjamin. Thank you very much for having me.
It's very good to have you here. Thank you for joining us. So we like to start by understanding a little bit about people's journey into fintech. And I understand, or I know that you were originally a promising young footballer at Brighton Football Club, but then got ruled out by an injury. How did you get from football to fintech? It's not an obvious journey.
It's not. It's a great question. So I would love to say that I'd always had such a passion for fintech and financial services that I proactively left my football career and became a sort of in the fintech scene. But unfortunately, it would be a lie. So it was due to injury. So I had a sort of fairly promising career, played up until my sort of late teens. I'd always had, I suppose, a real interest in sort of financial services. Once I left football, I sort of took myself through the Open University course on economics. So it was always a sort of something that had been very interesting. And then I had sort of opportunities through a number of accelerator schemes, through sort of recruitment agencies, Michael Page and the like, to sort of take my football career and move that into the business space. And then I ended up sort of working in a few tech organizations before joining Swift. I spent a number of years at Swift working up to running sort of a couple of their regions. And that was really where I suppose the passion for sort of fintech, for payments, for transformation really started to sort of bear fruit. And then sort of more recently, the last 18 months or so, I've been working at 10x Banking. So I would love to say it's a more interesting story, but certainly it's been a really exciting journey.
So can you give our viewers a little bit of background on 10x Banking? I'm sure there'll be plenty of people watching this who do know 10x Banking, but also some who don't. Can you give them a little bit of context about what is 10x Banking?
Of course, yeah. So from I suppose in terms of what we do, so we're very much in a sort of modern digital transformation around core banking. We were founded sort of just over eight and a half years ago now by Anthony Jenkins, so the former group CEO of Barclays. And he founded 10x on the premise that he was really frustrated with the technology that he had to work with, both at Barclays and at Citibank previously, and always felt there must be a better way of delivering transformation. A lot of that came out in sort of speed to market. How do you launch new products very, very quickly? How do you iterate? How do you kind of respond to geopolitics, sort of economic sort of activities? And what Anthony kind of sat down with a blank piece of paper, and he talks about this very openly at his dining room table, and said, how do I do this? How do I leverage technology to help banks to transform? And that's really where 10x was born out of. I think the view was that in order to accelerate some of the digital transformation, the core was really the foundation. So getting the core right allows you then to build on top of, around of, integrate with. And that was really where 10x was sort of founded. So we've been on that journey for the last 8.5 years now, sort of helping banks to modernize their core banking platforms.
A colleague I used to work with in the past used to say, replacing your core banking is a bit like trying to change the engines on an aircraft while it's in flight. You know, it's a horrifically complex challenge. Can you tell us a little bit about who some of your customers are? Because 10x has had plenty of success over those 8 years. Can you tell us a little bit about who are some of your most interesting customers, or some of your biggest customers? That's a bit of a trick question there. But who are some of your favourite customers, perhaps?
Even that is a dangerous question. So let me talk about a couple of customers that we work with. So I suppose one of the foundational clients of ours has been JP Morgan Chase and the Chase UK brand. So we've been working with Chase for a number of years now. We helped them to launch Chase UK. So we act as the core banking platform that supports the Chase brand, which has been a huge success. I think we've seen them scale up to millions of customers, a huge number of accounts, and been really, really successful. One of my favorite stories about Chase actually is that I think when they launched, they had such success that on the App Store, they were rated number one on the App Store. Now, not just number one in terms of financial services, they were number one, and second was TikTok. So it gives you an idea of how impressive I think that brand has been. I think when they launched, they certainly had access to or delivered very, very compelling interest rates that allowed them to grow their deposit book, and that was built on the 10x platform. That's very much in kind of the retail space. I think if we kind of look over the other side of the globe, in Australia, we work very closely with Westpac. In fact, we've worked on a couple of projects with Westpac, but they're currently transforming their corporate bank. So we're now supporting the corporate bank in their transformation around the core banking space as well, which is really interesting. So I think, and we might talk about this a little bit more, we've seen a lot of innovation, certainly around technology in retail. Mm-hmm. We've seen less in corporate. Yeah. So this is a really great opportunity to start that transformation journey as well. There are a number of other clients, and maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that, but there's certainly two that I think are very interesting. They both...
And so Westpac is replacing its existing systems with 10x, because I don't want to minimize the effort involved in setting up a brand new digital bank. It's incredibly complex, and Chase has made it look easy. But it is easier if you're setting up a greenfield operation than if you're replacing an existing one. But Westpac is migrating from its previous legacy systems onto 10x in corporate banking, right?
Correct. And I think, the greenfield versus the kind of the migrations, they are two very different activities. I think even with Chase as the example, there was still a number of sort of integration points into the enterprise systems and, the GL, the sort of anti-money laundering fraud systems. But certainly with Westpac, it is a migration. So moving off of one platform onto another. There are certain learns I think you go through on that journey. And I think, we are starting to see that, I think as an industry, the greenfield banks have maybe started to slow down. We're still seeing this kind of what we call the sidecar operations, where you might spin up something on the side and look to migrate. But I think actually the migration activity now is a really key one for the industry to help rid the legacy and move on to those more modern platforms.
So 10x Banking recently launched what you're calling Metacore. Yes. What is that? Is that just a product name, or is it sort of something somehow different from what you and some of your competitors were doing before? What is Metacore?
Yeah, so maybe I'll start. I might play a couple of scenes back to kind of bring us to the Metacore. So I think from a core banking landscape perspective, we've seen sort of various waves or iterations of core. I think if you play back right to the beginning, it was very much the kind of mainframe type cores. You fast forward into what we would consider the second generation. Some of those very much monolithic in nature. So you might have AML systems and payment systems all kind of combined in that core infrastructure. Where we are and where we have been probably over the last sort of 10 years or so is moving much more into the sort of composable architecture nature of a core system. And that typically referred to as neo-cores or next generation or third generation cores. And really what they are is they're doing something slightly different than maybe what the monolithic cores have done. Really focusing on probably two key areas. So the product ledger, so the ability to, the track balances, credits, debits, etc., as well as the ability to build products, and then fitting in as part of more of a sort of composable architecture through APIs and events to create that ecosystem. So we were founded sort of in similar timeframes to some of those neo-cores. But what we've started to see over the past few years is a number of challenges that have emerged. And the way that we kind of look at the neo-core space is in two lenses. So the configuration cores, where they've been great, right? They're really fast in terms of speed to market. They help you to launch products very, very quickly. But they were always designed with fintech, with sort of microfinance in mind. So never built for scale. And some of the challenges that have emerged there, really, one is scale. So, beyond sort of 1-2 million customers, it becomes quite challenging. But also as we move into a world of hyper-personalization and differentiation from a bank perspective, it becomes quite difficult to create that in those configuration cores.
Why?
Effectively, you're bound by what the platform provides you. So it's a roadmap deliverable, it's a change request, and it can almost be quite monolithic in nature in terms of where technology was.
So effectively, you're dependent on the vendor's roadmap. It's a different vendor, And it may be a faster moving roadmap or whatever, but you're still somewhat dependent on the vendor's roadmap. Okay.
Exactly. The other side of the coin, we see what we call the framework calls, which are, again, very, very different. So they're typically, very technology focused. They're very, very flexible in terms of the ability to do lots and lots of things. But you have to own, manage, and write that code yourself. So you're looking at sort of very engineering proficient banks that can leverage that type of technology. Again, you start to run into some of the challenges after the first or second product. How do you scale over, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 products? So we've started to see some challenges emerge there. And really what we've been focusing on is trying to solve what we call the neo-legacy. So actually, how do we take the best of configuration, the best of framework, and reduce some of the challenges? And that's really what we see as the Metacore. So we sort of define and see that as a new category of core banking. And really for us, it's focused on probably 3 or 4 key areas. One is around sort of product creation. So the ability to create any product, and universally across retail, SME, corporate banking. The way that we do that, the way that we solve for that is through kind of 2 key lenses. So the first being what we call our 10x modules. So these are modules that we provide out of the box to our customers that allow them to launch products very, very quickly. We see modules slightly differently than maybe modules were in a legacy sense, in that effectively they're deconstructed features of every financial product. So if you look at a current account, if you look at a loan, if you look at a mortgage, they all have some form of interest. A fixed term deposit and a loan may have a schedule. So we've looked at building those features in the platform as our 10x modules.
So you're reducing them down to the sort of smallest possible elements.
Exactly, and they all sit on the platform as microservices. On the other side of the coin, we then have what we call our 10x hooks framework, which allows customers to effectively write augmentation through code to create very, very hyper-personalized products. What we focus on is making sure that that is polyglot in terms of a programming language perspective. So if you're a Java programming bank, or if you work in Python, if you work in Ruby, you're able to use the resources that you have at your disposal and effectively compile those 2 things together to create very compelling products for your customers. So that's the sort of the first layer. The second layer really is around the ledger component. So actually, how can we build a very, very powerful, scalable and resilient ledger to support not only the small banks, but the very, very large enterprise and tier ones? So we've now scaled that
Someone
ledger.
like a Westpac.
Exactly. So we've scaled that to over 100 million accounts on the platform, to over 100,000 transactions per second, and importantly from a corporate perspective, to over 10,000 transactions per second to a single account. So that's
10,000 transactions per second to a single account.
To a single account.
Is that a scenario that happens?
So it's a really interesting question actually, because we do see the question goes, well, do we need that level of scale? And I think there are a couple of interesting dynamics off the back of that. One is that we've started to see a real shift in terms of the application of real-time payment systems. So UPI in India, Pix in Brazil. So that needs the peaks that you may need to cater for. As we see corporates move into more real-time payments as well, running payroll, running sort of high volume sort of transaction businesses, it's not necessarily that you're running at that scale 24 hours a day, but you need to be able to handle the peaks. The second element of that really is as we start to see, I was going to see how long it took us to mention AI, but as we start to see sort of new technologies emerge, platforms don't just need to have the TPS capability, but also the interaction capability. So how can we handle scale of requests through APIs in order to leverage the data that we have? So scale is definitely, the TPS, but it's also the ability to handle load from an API perspective. So those are sort of 2 of the really key functions of the platform. All of that is underpinned by the sort of enterprise-grade security, resiliency that you'd expect from a supplier working with tier 1 financial institutions. So that's really how we see the Metacore and some of the benefits that we see from what our customers tell us.
So what are you offering your customers that some of the other sort of new core banking platform vendors can't offer? What's the real differentiation? I realize you've just explained some of it, but there are other flavors available, right? What is it that's attracting some of your customers? What is it that really makes the Metacore really stand out?
Yeah, again, I think it's a really interesting question. And when I think about the sort of the benefits of the platform, I think it needs to be looked at in the lens of what is the value for the customer and what are the customers that we work with telling us. So one is absolutely around speed to market. So we ran a proof of concept recently with a customer. In 14 weeks, we managed to deliver what they told us would have taken them 18 months in their legacy core system. So that speed to market is not just a sort of a concept, but it's a reality.
In 14 weeks, you stood up some new products or something?
Exactly. So it was standing up the infrastructure. It was standing up products, integrating that end-to-end testing and sort of running some load testing through the platform. What we see as the benefit there is actually the 10x modules allow you to use functionality that exists. So it's very, very quick to deploy. I'm sure my team would tell me that in a matter of minutes, you could build a huge amount of varying products. We typically see that sort of 80 to 90% of our products are built through modules. So that sort of 10, 15% really becomes the hyper-personalization that creates differentiation. So that for me is a big value stream for the banks. That's on a speed to market perspective, but then you need to think about the maintenance side. So actually, you're not maintaining code for 100% of the product. It's 10 to 15%, and we like to think of that as the valuable business logic. So that's the valuable logic that sits in the product, and not, I think my engineers would call it, boilerplate code that you're managing that doesn't necessarily have a huge amount of value, and it's more of a utility. So that's definitely one area that we've seen sort of driving a huge amount of value. I do think the other side, I mentioned the scale sort of piece as well. We're working with another bank in sort of Asia. They've been having a huge amount of challenges in their growth trajectory where they're looking to double the number of customers they're working with from a corporate standpoint, but they're already reaching scale throughput challenges on their core systems. And as I say, they're looking to double the amount of customers they work with. So in order for them to achieve those objectives, we need to be able to provide them a platform that is scalable. So we're certainly seeing the product side being one very, very valuable area, and that scale being another. So maybe there are a couple of examples, maybe thinking more about the customer lens rather than sort of what we say is the differentiators in the platform.
One concern for many banking CIOs is that effectively they replace one legacy banking vendor with a new type of vendor that actually they end up just as dependent on your sort of roadmaps and so on. We talked a little bit about sort of roadmaps and so on. How does Metacore help banks avoid being sort of beholden to 10x to develop certain things? What is it about the flexibility of your systems that helps them with that? Yeah,
absolutely. So I think from a platform perspective, I've sort of mentioned the 10x modules. I don't think financial services over the last sort of 40, 50 years has changed conceptually too much from a foundation perspective. So the application of credit and debit interest, as I mentioned, the schedules, the account structures. So there's a lot of that foundation that remains fairly constant. And that's what we try to then build through the 10x modules, because we know that it's not going to change a huge amount year on year, month over month. What we then provide in terms of the flexibility to reduce the reliance on 10x is the 10x hooks framework. So 10x can absolutely help our customers to build some of that code, but we never place that as a reliance. So if the bank wants to build that themselves, they absolutely can. They own the IP, and they're that is their code that makes them different. They could work with partners to do it as well. So one of our sort of design principles in thinking about the Metacore was how does 10x move out of the bank's way? So how do we let them own more of their own destiny, reduce the reliance on us as a vendor, and let us focus on the bits that are really important for us in the context of the customer, which is, managing the infrastructure, managing the infrastructure if they decide to, could be hosted on their own private cloud environments on premise, but really focusing on those modules and keeping those maintained up to date and evergreen. So we really try to move out of our customers' way. And I think also from an integration standpoint, where we're using very modern technologies, modern sort of integration sort of applications, it means that, again, they're not relying on us for those integrations. That can be something that they can manage, or one of their systems integrators could manage those projects as well. So we really try to move out of the way and sort of reduce that reliance on 10x in the long term.
Thank you. You touched on AI earlier, and it's kind of hard to avoid because it's so fundamental to the future of this industry and many other industries. Are you seeing AI starting to change the way banks are thinking about modernization? Is it starting to change a little bit what your customers are sort of asking you for? I mean, you already talked about sort of the importance of personalization and so on. Is AI sort of starting to change what your clients are thinking about?
I think short answer is yes, absolutely. We're probably seeing it in maybe three distinct areas in terms of how we work with clients. One is absolutely at the kind of the customer experience layer. So how is the bank app, how is the bank sort of producing that outward facing to their customers? We had a really amazing demo from one of our customers recently in terms of what they've built. That will be launched hopefully next year, so we can't talk about it in detail right now. But can't give you the scoop, but it was really exciting in terms of how that sort of almost like a pocket PA, recommendation engines, helping customers to actually gain greater sort of credit levels and sort of their credit history, etc. So there's some really exciting things I think happening at the front end from a customer facing standpoint. From a 10x perspective, I think we're then starting to see the back office side. And for me, that's around, whether it's sort of code development. So we talked about hooks. Is there ways and means that you can leverage AI to help sort of speed up some of that code generation? It might be in sort of back office instances around sort of data cleansing. So I think we're starting to see a lot of application in that space. I think the other really exciting one that we see is around sort of the migration capability. So when you think about migrations in terms of extracting the data from an old system, transforming it, and then loading it into the 10x platform, we see AI having a really good use case around that cleansing of data. And we actually ran a sort of proof of concept recently with a company called DLT Apps in terms of, that whole end-to-end process. And I think the really interesting thing there is it will reduce the cost of those migration activities, which then starts to unlock the capability of change, not just for the large banks, but for the building societies, for the smaller banks, which is going to allow them to compete on that level as well. So I think there's probably a few different areas that we see.
Super, super interesting. Last couple of quick questions for you. So we're at the time of year when everyone's making bold predictions about what's going to happen in 2025, what's the future of financial services. Are there any big things that you think might change next year or things you're excited about in 2025?
Yes. So I'm not going to try and go too bold. I'm going to try and be a bit more realistic in terms of where I think that the industry is heading. I think from a core banking perspective, I think we are about to hit this next wave of transformation. I think that's undeniable. The interactions that we've had with customers over this year has probably tripled, quadrupled in terms of the number of engagements that we're involved in. So I think we're about to see this wave of core transformation happen. That's driven by a lot of factors. So competition from the sort of the neos, the fintechs. We're starting to see a number of the legacy systems actually become end of life. So they're not supported, provides huge amounts of risk. And I think as we start to see the application of AI and sort of new technologies, it's very difficult to leverage those with some of those mainframe architectures that are running. So for me, I think core banking is certainly going to be one of the hot topics of 25 and into 26. I think underneath that, we've talked about AI. I think AI is going to have a big impact next year. I don't necessarily see it being a wholesale sort of renovation next year, and AI is everywhere. I think there are certain pockets of business value that we're going to see emerge, and we talked about migrations. I think for me, that's a really key one, enabling that sort of cost-efficient migration to allow you to adopt a platform that is sort of unifying the data, which ultimately allows you to then leverage AI in the future from a customer-facing standpoint. So I think AI is certainly something that we're going to see become very, very interesting as well. And I think the last point, and maybe sort of more holistically on a macro perspective, all of the institutions we're talking to, big focus around sort of cost-income ratios, how they're managing costs but still applying growth. And I think we're seeing a very big difference now in terms of the digital side. Digital, although not necessarily fixed cost in terms of the money you're paying out, but it is predictable. And what we're starting to see is that predictability allows banks to forecast their growth, reduce some of the costs, but enable them to scale as well. So I think there's going to be a big focus on cost rationalization still. What we may start to see, and we've seen this in Europe, is the consolidation. So you kind of look at the UK, I think, with Coventry and Co-op, you kind of see what's happening with some of the banks in Europe. I think we'll start to see that more holistically as well, which for me is a big opportunity for those institutions to then take on that transformation journey.
Yeah, I think we're going to see a lot of consolidation, aren't we? We always like to end Spotlight with a sort of lighter, inspirational note. So If you could give one piece of advice to somebody watching this video who's just starting out in a career in financial services or financial services technology, or even to your younger self, what would that one piece of advice be, perhaps?
So, in fact, this was one of my first CEOs gave me this piece of advice, and it stuck with me. It's probably one that you may hear quite often, but be curious. And I think curiosity is something that I've, tried to take with me wherever I've been. And that's being curious about the industry that you're working with, the people you're working with, the impact that you have with clients and with society, and that whole sort of gamut of something to be curious about. So I think for me, that's where you then start to learn, you start to grow your own brand, your profile. So I think being curious is absolutely a fundamental. If there was one more piece of advice, it would be progress over perfection. And I think that's something I've taken with me from a sort of a footballing, sporting background. Don't strive for perfection, just strive for progress. And I think if you kind of take those two principles together, I'm sure you can have an exciting career in fintech.
I love those. Be curious and fast, not perfect.
Exactly.
Love it. Lewis, thank you so much for joining us today. Where can people find out a little bit more about you and a little bit more about 10x Banking?
Yep, so you can find us at 10xbanking.com. So feel free to have a look on the website, reach out to the team, and we'd be happy to spend time with anyone who's interested to learn more about 10x.
Fantastic. Thank you. Well, that's all we have time for this week. Please do make sure you follow 11FS on LinkedIn, Instagram, and TikTok to stay updated with all the cool stuff we're doing. And if you enjoy our show, please do subscribe to the 11FS YouTube channel, where you can catch up on previous episodes, which are also filled with great advice like we heard from Lewis. Have a great week. Thank you and goodbye.